There are days when everything seems to be stuck, right? You wake up, try to concentrate, do what needs to be done. But he feels that he is carrying an invisible weight. The bills come before the energy. Thought runs faster than solution. And no matter how hard you try, it feels like something is out of place. It's like there's a closed door, but you don't even know where the key is. Within the Jewish tradition, there is a set of words that span centuries, the Tehillim, the Psalms. But among so many recited, taught, popularized, there is one that is rarely mentioned. And it's not because he's less powerful. It is just the opposite. He was hidden because he carries a secret, a vibrational code that acts as a key to open doors where effort alone cannot cope. This psalm is not used as an amulet. He does not promise wealth overnight, nor magic disguised as spirituality. But among those who know it, it is treated with reverence, because it reorders the internal field. And when that happens, the outer paths respond. People who had been stuck in debt for years and didn't know where else to run. Entrepreneurs who, even with good products, saw their projects always stop at the almost ordinary people, but thirsty to live with more purpose and less financial suffocation. They all found in this psalm not an immediate miracle, but a new frequency. Today, for the first time, I'm going to reveal to you what that psalm is. But more than that, I'll show you why it works, how to recite consciously, and how to make it part of a ritual that can change the way you deal with money forever. This is not content to memorize, it's to live. And when you understand what's hidden within those words, you never read a psalm the same way again. Let's go together. What you'll discover now has been silent for generations, but maybe the time has come for it to be activated by you. You have come this far because this wisdom is already part of something you carry within you. It's nothing new. It is recognition, because when an ancient truth meets a prepared soul, it needs no explanation. It simply awakens. And those who feel this know they are not here by chance. You are here because you are ready to access a new level of awareness about wealth, purpose, and direction. So it makes sense that you walk with us. Here, every video is more than information. It's activation. It is a space for those who want to thrive with identity, aligned with a wisdom that has been tested for centuries and continues to work today. Click the sign up button now and join this conscious growth community. Because when the mind expands, reality follows. And what comes next is even deeper. Money, in Jewish thought, was never just a matter of calculation. Of course, it requires strategy, awareness, and effort. But there's an older, almost forgotten understanding that says, sustenance begins in the spirit before it reaches the pocket. And that's where the Psalms come in. For many people, Tehillim, as they are called in Hebrew, are just beautiful prayers, poetic phrases written by kings and prophets, read in difficult times or in religious ceremonies. But that's just the surface. Within the Jewish tradition, the Psalms are treated as spiritual tools of vibrational reprogramming. Each word, each verse, each melody has a specific weight, a frequency, an invisible field of action that acts directly in the deepest areas of the soul. In practice, this means this. When you recite a psalm with kavana, that is, with directed intention, with your mind and heart aligned, you activate codes that alter the field around you. And this is not symbolic language. Kabbalists explain that everything that exists in the physical world has a spiritual origin. Financial problems, closed doors, blockages in livelihood, repetitions of failure, they often have roots that are not in the planning, but in the spiritual flow that has been interrupted. And Tehillim are like tools that restore that flow. Therefore, throughout history, Jewish sages used certain specific psalms to attract parnasa, sustenance with dignity, not out of superstition, but because they knew that the spoken word, when loaded with intention and aligned with the truth of the soul, is capable of moving the invisible. The Psalms, therefore, are not mantras ready for mechanical repetition. They are maps, and when used well, they activate dormant paths within the person himself, paths that reflect abroad as synchronicities, ideas, right decisions, unexpected opportunities, and even financial cures. Have you ever noticed how some people talk about money always with heaviness, guilt, fear, or anxiety? These words, these verbal constructs, create a frequency that shapes how money responds. Now imagine what happens when a person starts using light-laden words, made up of kings who have faced battles, falls, losses, and yet sustained kingdoms with purpose. The Psalms bring this. They cleanse the frequency of the soul. They re-educate the internal discourse. And as a consequence, they reorient what the person starts to attract. There is an expression in Jewish tradition that says, "The mouth that speaks builds the world." In other words, it all starts with the sound, in the sound aligned with purpose. That is why the Psalms are spoken in an audible voice, even if it is low, because sound materializes. And when a person speaks, hears, and feels at the same time, they align with creation. In practice, it is not just words that have an effect. It is the sum of three elements: spoken word plus real intention, plus state of inner listening. That is why the Tehillim have power over material reality, including money. They don't attract currency. They attract clarity. Clarity to understand what was stuck. Clarity to change a pattern. Clarity to make decisions with courage. And that's what changes someone's financial route. Not every psalm was meant to be recited aloud in the crowd. Within the Jewish tradition, there are texts that carry such a specific, delicate force that their power lies precisely in the silence that surrounds them. Psalm 112 is one of these. Rarely mentioned in popular circles, he does not usually appear in the lists of miraculous psalms shared on the internet. But those who know its structure, its content, and its spiritual roots understand why. It is not a psalm to ask for. It's a psalm to align with, to become, to attract wealth with dignity, without fanfare, without despair, and without guilt. This psalm was recited with constancy by men and women in communities that, despite facing persecution and crisis, managed to prosper. They knew something that most have forgotten: that true prosperity does not begin abroad. It begins in the interior structure. And Psalm 112 is a map of that structure. In him we find the image of someone who fears the eternal, who lives justly, who is unfazed by chaos, and who distributes his resources generously, not as an isolated act, but as a way of life. And for this reason, his house remains firm. His offspring are blessed. His name is remembered with honor. But why was this psalm so hidden? The answer lies in a deep principle of Judaism called tzniut, which many associate with modesty and dress, but which actually goes much further. Tzniut is the spiritual awareness that what is most sacred, truest, and most transformative, it doesn't need to be overexposed. That which is shared with reverence works more deeply. Therefore, the teachers taught this psalm only to the ready students, not because of the ego of keeping secrets, but because of the responsibility of handing over a code to someone who will treat it with the seriousness it demands. And this psalm is a code. Each verse is a key. And what is impressive is not only the content, but the silence with which it has crossed the centuries. In many Jewish families, it was recited in a low voice during the morning or before some important decision was made, not with the expectation of receiving something immediately, but with the desire to align with the type of person who attracts resources, because he knows how to multiply them with purpose. Because, in the end, Psalm 112 speaks of a financial character, of prosperous identity, of someone who is not driven by fear nor dominated by greed, but who understands that wealth is a natural consequence of those who live with clarity, generosity, and firmness of mind. Notice the verses. They do not describe a miracle. They describe a type of person, a silent, stable figure, who even surrounded by bad news is not shaken, who conducts his affairs justly, who gives with generosity, and therefore never lacks. This image is not poetic, it is strategic. It builds verse by verse the portrait of a mind spiritually trained to deal with money without losing its soul. And that's the real secret. Many believe that to attract prosperity, it is enough to repeat phrases or make promises. But the Jewish tradition teaches something else. What you say, you plant. But what you become, you reap. Psalm 112 is not an amulet. It is a mirror. It shows what needs to be adjusted internally for the external reality to change. He fine-tunes the field, aligns the posture, and therefore it does not need to be shouted. It needs to be lived. Now that you know this psalm, tell me, Which verse of it caught your attention the most? She writes in the comments, Psalm 112 found me, and, if you want, shares the phrase that touched her heart the most. Sometimes it is in this exchange that wisdom begins to take root, and in the next excerpt, I'll show you how to activate this psalm with awareness, in a simple but profoundly powerful ritual. Because knowing what the psalm is only the beginning. The real power is in how you choose to use it. Knowing what the psalm is just the beginning. True transformation happens when you incorporate it as a living practice. And therein lies the difference between those looking for a quick fix and those who are ready to access real, consistent, and quietly powerful change. Within the Jewish tradition, the recitation of the Tehillim is not an automatic ritual, nor a hasty reading. It is a spiritual activation, and like all activation, it requires presence, intention, and respect for time. Psalm 112, because it carries this energy of stability, steadfastness, and abundance with purpose, needs to be treated in the same way. Clearly, the best time to recite it is not when you have time left, but when you choose to honor a moment of your day as sacred. Therefore, many masters recommend that it be recited first thing in the morning, before the mind gets lost in external demands. It is like planting a seed in fresh soil, when the field is still silent and ready to receive. But it is not enough to just read. The activation of the psalm begins before the first word is spoken. There is a simple but powerful technique that you can apply daily. There are 3 steps that align body, mind, and intention. The first is silence. Not the silence of the absence of noise, but that of conscious presence. Before you open the text, sit in a quiet space. It could be in your bedroom, on the balcony, or anywhere you can close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Inhale for a count of 4, hold for another 4, exhale at the same time. Do this 3 times. This breathing pattern is not random. It calms the nervous system, increases oxygenation of the brain, and creates a state of heightened attention. You're not just about to read it, it's about to line up. The second stage is paused reading with internal listening. Take Psalm 112. It can be in Hebrew, in Portuguese, or in both languages. What matters is not the language, it is the intention. Go verse by verse, read it audibly, pause between sentences, breathe between one line and another. As you read, feel what each word is awakening within you. Don't try to understand everything rationally. The mind will want to control, but this practice is to touch a deeper layer. Sometimes a simple sentence activates a memory, an emotion, or a clarity that you didn't expect. Let it come. This is the field reorganizing. The third step is the statement of purpose. When you have finished the psalm, close your eyes for a moment longer. Place your hand on your chest and say firmly, not shouting but with conviction, "Today, I act firmly, I thrive on purpose, and my house is upheld with righteousness." This statement does not need to be memorized. You can adapt it. The essential thing is that it is born of your intention. The psalm aligns you with a new frequency. The statement seals this frequency as a decision. This daily practice takes no more than 15 minutes, but what it generates cannot be measured in time. Because after a few days, something starts to change. And it's not just in the outside world. First, it's inside. You begin to notice that you no longer react with despair to situations. The choices become clearer. Distractions lose strength. And little by little, things that were stuck start to move. It is as if the field around you responds to the clarity that you have come to carry. And it is exactly this clarity that opens the channels for what the ancients called signs of the soul. Small synchronicities that seem like coincidence, but which are deep down responses. An email that arrives at the right time. A contact that resurfaces after months. An idea that appears right after the psalm, as if it had been whispered. All of this is not chance. It is alignment. And those who practice with kavana, the deep intention, begin to perceive these movements with more sensitivity. The invisible becomes more legible. The most beautiful thing about this practice is that it does not require perfection. It requires presence. And therefore each person can adapt this moment to their rhythm, their routine, and even their story. There are those who prefer to read the psalm at sunrise. Others create this space right after the shower with a cup of coffee next to it, as if that moment were an appointment with something bigger. The important thing is to understand that you are doing something with heaven and with yourself, and this is already sacred. Over time, it is possible to create even a small symbolic altar. Nothing mystical nor complex. A corner where you can place your open psalm, an object that represents abundance with purpose, such as a small stone, a candle, a piece of bread, or an ancient coin, and a notebook to write down the insights that come after reading. Because yes, they will come. And registering is also an act of respect for your own spiritual and financial evolution. This daily activation begins to position you differently in the world. You stop chasing money like someone who hunts for something elusive, and he begins to walk with the firmness of someone who knows he is becoming the kind of person who attracts resources out of alignment, not desperation. This is what the masters called the open channel, when you become able to receive because you are already vibrating in the field of those who know what to do with what comes. Therefore, the most important thing about this practice is not only the psalm, it is the posture that it awakens in you. The content of Psalm 112 speaks of someone who distributes, who does not let himself be shaken, who gets up even in difficult times, who acts generously without losing discernment. So when you recite that text with intention, you're not just asking for something, you're aligning with that template. It's saying to the universe, this is what I'm ready to live, and this readiness is what opens doors. Whoever approaches the Psalms only to ask for something is taking the smallest part of what they can offer. The real strength of the Tehillim, and especially of Psalm 112, lies not in the act of crying out for help, but in the art of becoming one prepared to receive. And this difference changes everything. There is a very fine line between desiring prosperity and being available for it. Many people want it, few really do. And the psalm is not a key that opens the door of heaven to pour out blessings, as if it were a cry for help answered. It is a code that rearranges the interior, correcting silent leaks that prevent abundance from remaining. And that's where the great shift of consciousness begins. Understanding that the biggest obstacle to prosperity is not outside, it's in the invisible blockages. That fear of growing up and not being able to cope. That unconscious guilt for having more than others. That anxiety of losing everything. The comparison disguised as admiration. The envy camouflaged in justifications. These are all spiritual leaks. And the psalm, when recited with kavana, aligned intention, doesn't just call for abundance, it prepares the soul to sustain it. Each verse of Psalm 112 heals these inner breaches. When he talks about not fearing bad news, he is talking about the anxiety that sabotages important decisions. When he mentions that the righteous distribute generously, he touches on the guilt that stops the flow of giving and receiving. When he speaks of firmness of heart, he calms the impulse to act by comparison. It is as if the text were tailor-made to heal the relationship of the human being with sustenance. And in fact, it was. Within Judaism, wealth is not seen as a prize. It is mission, and mission requires preparation. Therefore, the real miracle that this psalm activates is not that of attracting money out of thin air. It is that of restoring the inner structure of those who will know how to deal with whatever comes. This is the greatest miracle, not that of receiving, but that of remaining. There's a little-known but extremely profound Jewish metaphor about it. It is said that a very simple merchant from a small village recited this psalm every day when he opened his little shop. Not by tradition, but because his grandfather had taught him that that psalm kept the house standing. He had no training, no great contacts, but his store never closed. And more than that, the neighbors came to him not only to buy, but to ask for advice. "You always seem at peace," they said. And he would reply, "It's because I start the day remembering who I am, not what I lack." This man did not become a billionaire, but he supported his family, educated his children with dignity, and kept his name clean until the end of his life. Interestingly, one of his sons, years later, would become one of the great investors of his generation. And when asked what his father's secret was, he said, he had a frequency that attracted respect, trust, and open doors. Wealth just responded to that. That is the essence of Psalm 112. It does not create wealth. It creates the kind of person that wealth recognizes. Someone who does not chase money, but walks with integrity, firmness, and purpose. and therefore walks at the same pace of abundance, because the energy of receiving is not in waiting with outstretched hands, but in acting with the available heart. This psalm rearranges the backstage of the mind. It makes decisions more clear. Business is conducted more ethically. Investments are no longer impulsive, and partnerships are not born of desperation. It changes the posture, and consequently changes the result. You have already felt it inside. This message made sense, brought direction, and awakened something that was perhaps dormant. This is how true wisdom works. Silent, but transformative. And when something good catches up with you, the next step is simple. Keep that flow going. So, leave your like right now. It is the most practical way to show that this knowledge has touched you, and that it is worth taking to more people who are also ready to thrive with awareness. Now that you understand the root, strength, and purpose of this psalm, it's time to experience it as a path, not just a text. And for that, I want to propose you a simple, deep, and highly transformative ritual. A 7-day journey with Psalm 112, done intentionally, strategically, and in line with the spiritual codes that the sages have used for centuries. Why 7 days? Because in the Jewish calendar, 7 is not just a number, it's a crossing. In Hebrew, the number 7 is linked to the idea of fullness in spiritual time. The creation of the world took 7 days. Each week closes with the 7th day, the Shabbat, which represents not the end, but the elevation. Everything that passes for 7 is transformed, complete, repositioned. It is the time needed to leave one state and enter another. And that's exactly what this practice will do. Move you from a cycle of financial anxiety to a new frequency of steadfastness, presence, and direction. During this journey, the psalm will be his center, but he will not be alone. You will combine daily reading with 3 symbolic practices that reinforce its content and activate in the field of action what you are realigning in the soul. First step, daily recitation. Always set aside the same time. It can be early in the morning or at night, but the important thing is that there is consistency. Before you start, breathe. Enter into a state of presence, as we learned before. Read Psalm 112 in an audible voice with pauses, with internal listening. Don't run. Let each verse tell you something new every day. And at the end, make your personal statement of purpose. It's not to ask, it's to affirm what you're choosing to become. Second step, 1 financial act per day. This may be small, but it must be intentional. Organize a forgotten bill, cancel an unnecessary expense, write down all the expenses of the day, put a clear goal on paper, review the account statement. The proposal here is to act as someone who honors money and takes responsibility for its flow. A psalm without action becomes superstition, and we are dealing with living wisdom, not magic. Step 3, a gesture of silent generosity. Every day during those 7 days, you will donate something. It doesn't have to be high, it doesn't always have to be money. It can be time, attention, a word, a listen. But it has to be done with the heart, without announcement, without demand for return. The psalm speaks about the one who distributes justly and stands firm. So you will practice this in a concrete act. The gesture needs to be discreet, because the secret of the impact lies precisely in not using it as a bargaining chip. Fourth step, 1 note per day. Set aside a notebook, or file just for that. And at the end of the day, write a line. Can be a sign that you noticed, a phrase that touched you in the psalm, a feeling, a decision made, or even a thought that came more clearly. Write, because to record is to recognize, and those who recognize, reinforce. This writing is a seal, an anchor. When you practice this set for 7 days, something happens that you can't explain with logic alone. You begin to feel life realigning itself from within. It's not that everything changes suddenly, but you change the way you react, choose, and position yourself. And that's when the outer paths begin to open up. Not because you asked for a miracle, but because you've become a part of it. This journey does not require perfection. She asks for truth. And this is within the reach of anyone who decides to live this experience with sincerity. You don't need to understand everything. You just need to do it consciously. When you practice this set for 7 days, something happens that you can't explain with logic alone. You begin to feel life realigning itself from within. It's not that everything changes suddenly, but you change the way you react, choose, and position yourself. And that's when the outer paths begin to open up. Not because you asked for a miracle, but because you've become a part of it. This journey does not require perfection. She asks for truth. And this is within the reach of anyone who decides to live this experience with sincerity. You don't need to understand everything. You just need to do it consciously. And as these 7 days go by, something even more important begins to reveal itself. How to sustain this energy after the ritual. Because living the psalm is one thing, staying in it is quite another. And that's what we're going to talk about next. Some words do not come to mind. They go straight through the chest. Because they're not just phrases, they're invitations. Psalm 112 recited with awareness is exactly that. A call to awaken a new financial and spiritual identity. Not as someone who cries out for help, but as someone who has already understood that the key is in the internal posture. Today, you accessed something that many people spend their lives without knowing exists. A code that has remained silent for centuries, preserved by those who understood that the greatest treasures are not scattered, they are trusted. And now it's in your hands, not because it fell from the sky, but because you were ready to receive. That says a lot about your journey. So instead of simply ending with a comment here, I want to propose something more symbolic. Create your own verse. Choose a phrase that represents what you want to build from now on, and write it in the comments as if you were sealing a pact with this new phase. It doesn't have to be perfect. It needs to be true. Just one sentence. Something like, "My voice sustains my value," or "Abundance recognizes me because I recognize myself." Leave it on record here and let the universe witness it. And if you felt that this space here is more than a video, more than content, but a place where your soul finds direction, then you are already part of it. Here we don't accumulate information. We transform frequency. So subscribe to the channel now and leave your like. This is the right time. Because in the next video that is appearing to you, I will show you something that few have dared to touch. The Jewish combination to bring true prosperity into your life. Get ready. The next key comes loaded with a lot of wisdom and precision. See you there.